Welcome to this video lecture on scientific research in information systems. This video lecture is based on the book Scientific Research in Information Systems, a beginner's guide, available in the second edition from Springer via the Springer homepage, via Amazon or other online booksellers. This set of video lectures effectively covers Chapter 7, Ethical Considerations in Research, and this particular video lecture that you're watching right now is part 3 of that series, and we will discuss ethical guidelines for scientific conduct. Now, we should have established by now from the first 2 lectures in this series that all behaviors in the research process, be it designing a study, developing a theory, collecting data, testing hypotheses, analyzing facts, are subject to ethical considerations, both codified that exist as implemented principles, some of which we have covered in the previous video lectures, as well as uncodified ones. So even if there is no particular institutional legal rule around this. And in this lecture, we talk especially those ethical considerations that are important in empirical data collections that involve human subjects. So what we are allowed, not allowed, codified or uncodified, to do with human subjects. And the fundamental principle that people need to be aware of is that research involving human subjects in institutions that receive federal research funding, universities, scientific institutes like the Max Planck Institute and so forth, they must receive what's called ethical clearance by an independent review board, an IRB, which means that these institutions have dedicated boards or committees, ethics committees, that are independent from the researcher. So they're not my colleague, they're not my next door neighbor. They are from the university, independent from the researchers, and they need to grant me ethical clearance. That means they need to approve my proposed studies that involve human subjects, and importantly, before I start doing the study. Meaning that any research involving human subjects must receive ethical clearance by an independent board. Not by my colleague, not by my boss, not by my advisor, supervisor, by an independent board, before I start collecting or analyzing anything. In other words, before I do anything. In so doing, what the IRB does is that it takes a brief description of the research or the planned research and evaluates it against certain criteria, certain ethical principles that must hold. So, very importantly, one of the things they look for is whether participation in the study is in fact voluntary. That means whether subjects, whether they be students or anybody else, participate free and willingly, whether or not they involvement in the study means they experience physical, psychological, other types of stress, or other kinds of damage is possible. Now, in information systems, we typically do not harm people very much, but you can very easily conceive situations in medicine where we are exerting damage. If it's a vaccination, we are injecting that into the bloodstream. So we are literally harming people because we stick them with a needle, say. And of course, the medication that we're experimenting upon may or may not work, which again can induce all sorts of damage to participants. And they may or may not be willing and free to participate in this. Even in information systems, we do have situations where it's possible that a study involves physical or psychological stress. Imagine you would be doing a study that involves content from the dark web, that looks at, harmful or potentially triggering content from social media platforms and so forth. So it's very easy to conceive situations in which the participation can be stress-inducing, can be damage-inflicting, or may not be voluntary. And that's exactly what an IRB would look out for. And in a situation, if a study is in these areas, it would actually determine whether or not it's even okay to do such a study. A second thing an IRB evaluates is whether or not participants have what's called informed consent, meaning that they understand fundamentally what will happen to them, how their data will be used, who will have access to this data, how it will be protected, for example, in terms of anonymity or confidentiality, and also how it will be reported. Now, in some forms of research, say in survey research, this is actually fairly simple. You can say, look, this survey will be anonymous. We are not storing an email or any identifying information like a name or address or anything like that. But for example, if you do a qualitative study and to interview people, you know who they are. You know them, so it can't ever be anonymous, but you can protect some of them in terms of confidentiality. People have a right to know what happens to whatever it is that they do, what they say, what they click, what they respond. So for example, one of the things they have a right to is to determine whether or not they want to be quoted saying either with full disclosure of the name or even in an anonymous or confidential way. So when we write something like a manager reports. So this is part of the so-called informed consent, where subjects in the study have a right to, and that again is what an IRB looks at. The third thing that an IRB evaluates is whether participants have the right to withdraw from participation in the study at any time. Now again, in a survey, this is simple. Subjects can always just not continue doing the survey. If you do an interview, you can just get up and leave if you want. In an experimental setting, sometimes this is a little bit trickier. For example, if you're in a closed room and where you may or may not actually get up and leave very easily. If you have studies, for example, when you have an fMRI, function magnetic resonant image machinery, where you like sit literally in the machine and measuring things while you're doing things, this right can be compromised at some points. That's something an IRB would look at. And of course, in some other instances, say you're collecting Instagram data, you're collecting comments by people in certain forums or on certain posts. Do they know that you're collecting this data? Can they withdraw from participating in your study? Can they make you stop collecting their responses on certain topics at any given point in time? That is something that an IRB would evaluate. And finally, an IRB evaluates what happens to the research data, how it is stored, how is it protected, how is it analyzed, and how is it being reported. So who owns the data, where physically, literally, digitally is it stored and backupped, what mechanisms are in place to ensure privacy, confidentiality, access, and reuse. At the university, for example, there is a research data management team with a research data management plan, research data management protected, private secure service, where researchers can upload and manage research data in accordance to ethical clearance considerations. Now, what that looks like varies by university and sometimes even by faculty. So for example, here we have giving two examples from the University of Hamburg, where information systems research is practiced and taught in the business school, but also in the faculty of informatics and mathematics. And they do both have ethics commissions. They have independent review boards, so a committee of people that determine and give approval on ethical project. And what that usually looks like is that you can look up who the members are, and there are templates and forms you need to fill out. And certain information you have to disclose about consent, participation, risks, data reporting, data storage, and so forth. And if so, then you grant it. It typically comes with a approval number, so you can quote that somewhere, and then you're free to proceed with your study. Here's an example of such a consent form. This is part 2 of what an IRB evaluate. A typical consent form that you would have people fill out in your research. It could be literally them signing the page. It could be that they click, I agree or confirm on a web page in a survey, for example, and so forth. So, of course, you put project details here, who's in doing the study, what is the ethical clearance approval by an IRB. You insert specification. You need to specify what exactly participating in the study actually means. In this category, it means like at least one interview that I record. You specify who's able to access the data. In this particular case, it was just me. And you give participants choices. So tick boxes in this particular case. For example, whether they have the right to review any data, transcripts, notes, anything else that pertains to them. Very often they don't want to, but they have the right of requesting that. They have the right to be quoted directly, indirectly, or not at all. And they have the right to review any report or paper that is built based on data in which they participated. So very often these people do not exercise these rights, but in principle they can, and in several cases this does happen. For example, if you work with a company where you're disclosing certain company specific or sensitive data, they do exercise these rights. They do want to see what you're writing about them before you openly disclose that or even put that into the review process. So this is also part of ethical considerations. And what you also typically do is that you name and specify the independent review board or some other independent ethics commissioner that could be involved in case there are breaches to the ethical clearance or to the consent, so that people have someone else, like a third party, they can turn to. And to wrap things up, these types of ethical clearance in scientific context, they do get violated, sometimes inadvertently, sometimes because the way the independent review board processes and obligations are implemented varies by university and even by faculty. And every now and then, people don't follow them at all. A very famous example of that is what's called the emotional contagion, or the Facebook secret moods experiment that they ran about 10 years ago, where Facebook, the company, actually experimented with users of the Facebook platform without letting anyone know that they were doing this. So it was not reviewed by an ethics board. Part of the reason is that Facebook isn't a research institution, it's a commercial company. They don't have an independent review board. I don't know whether they have one now, but they certainly didn't have one back then. And so, secondly, they didn't ask anyone for informed consent. Yeah, so what they did is they manipulated the news feeds or the Facebook feeds of people by emotion, so that people got very positive, friendly, happy feeds, and other people got very negative, depressing, sad news into their feed. So what the people saw varied by emotions, because they wanted to see if there's an emotional contagion effect, meaning that if I get to see a lot of depressing news, I slightly get depressed myself, and so forth. And it turns out, yes, by the way, this does happen. But of course, it's incredibly dangerous. Imagine you are a very depressive person, or you have a tendency for suicidal intentions, and then you get a lot of depressing news. Yeah, so that your Facebook feed is actually worsening your condition. This can have very material, very physical consequences. It can cause people alter their life and cause death in certain cases. So this was a very clear breach of scientific ethics, except that it was by a company that is not technically legally obligated to follow scientific ethics, because it's not a publicly funded research institution. But this is a good example, and you can look it up to see why ethical considerations in conduct are important. This brings us to the end of this brief video lecture on ethical consideration in scientific conduct. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching.